I'm Jen with Hidden River Creative, and today we're going to be making this card inspired by this card. Join me, won't you?
Okay, the inspiration for today's card really started with a class called Color Your Day over at Altenew Academy. And I don't know about you all, but sometimes I really struggle picking out color combos for my cards. So the class really talks about looking all around you and finding inspiration in your everyday life. So that's exactly what I did. This card that I'm holding here is actually the design for my daily planner. I like to create the illusion that I'm in control of my life, but I digress. So for today's card, I chose this zero waste Wildflower Meadow die. This is a die that actually is exclusive to the Secret Garden 2025 retreat, but there are lots of other zero waste dies that would be perfect to use in place of this if you don't already have this die. I love these zero waste dies because you can cut out so many die cut pieces in one pass through your die cutting machine, and you could make one card or multiple cards. It really is up to you. So this is definitely something that you want to have in your stash. Next, I chose this embossing folder. It's called the Blooming Doily Charm embossing folder. I thought that the pattern on it looked really similar to some of the flowers in this zero waste die, so I thought it might be cute to use as a background to put my floral design on. So I will definitely be using that in this card design. Now let's get into the fun stuff. So I'm going to start with this zero waste die, and as you can see, this is one solid plate. That's the whole point, right? To run it through once and get all of these nice little pieces. However, sometimes it can be a little difficult to get a good cut, but I have a tip for you, and you're welcome. So, I know we all have these bubble mailers either just lying around or you've thrown them away, but I have a really great use for them. So, if you cut them into pieces like the one I have here, that is probably about the size of an A2 card panel, which is about 4 1/4 by 5 1/2. You can add this to your die cutting sandwich and get a beautiful cut every single time. So what you need to do is just take your piece of bubble mailer, just like I have here, put your cardstock piece on top of your bubble mailer, and then take your zero waste die, flip it over with the cutting side down on top of that piece of cardstock, and then run that through your die cutting machine with your normal die cutting sandwich that you would use any other time. And as you will see here, this cut out perfectly. All of my pieces come right out of this panel, and it was just that simple. All you need is a piece of bubble mailer to add to your sandwich. Now, some people say you can only use this piece of bubble mailer once. I will actually get 2 to 3 uses out of mine. It just depends on what your individual results are. I'll just keep taking these little pieces out of my panel and arranging them into piles. And then I'll run a second piece of white cardstock through to get another set of die cuts. Now I took my inspiration card and looked through my Altenew fresh dye inks to find colors that matched most closely. So I ended up pulling some Pinkalicious to match some of those darker flowers in that design, and also Rubellite for a darker shade of that same Pinkalicious color. And then for the lighter pink flowers, I chose Pink Diamond and Baby Pink. And you'll see later that I don't actually end up using all 4 of these, but we'll get to that when we start coloring in the flowers. For my blues, I chose Icy Water for that lighter blue, and then Azurite for the darker color, and then for my medium tone, I chose Ultramarine. A lot of times I like to use a light, a medium, and a dark tone to get a more seamless blend of color gradation, but it's really not necessary. You can typically get by with a light and a dark tone. Now for my greens, I did the same thing. I chose a light, a medium, and a dark. For my light, I chose Eucalyptus. For my medium, Hunter Green. And for my dark, I chose Forest Fern. And now with all my ink colors chosen, it's time to start ink blending. So I'm going to grab my Wildflower grip mat. Mine is actually an older version. I will link below the newer versions of this mat. They're slightly different dimensions than what I have here, but still really great to hold your die cuts while you're ink blending. I'm going to speed this way up because inking this amount of die cuts took some minutes. Okay, so I've just got my green inks here in my ink stand, which I love, and I'll link how you can get that below. I'm just going to put some eucalyptus on each of these leaves. I'm going to cover the whole thing, and then I'll come back in with a darker ink and just go down the center of this leaf. I'm going to leave the tips in that eucalyptus lighter green color, and then the center will be darker, and I thought that was kind of a fun look. This forest fern has just a hint of blue in it, so when I'm adding it to these die cuts in the center, they almost have kind of a tealish look to them. Now I'm going to come in with these other leaves, and I'm going to put down some hunter green on these, and kind of comparing the two there, and I'm like, oh, they look so different. You can really tell the color difference. No, you can't. They don't look different. They don't look different enough like that you could tell on your card, oh, these are two different color greens. But anyway, I tried, right? So I'm putting hunter green on these, kind of concentrating that toward the center mostly, and I'm gonna leave the little buds as light as possible without them being white. And you'll kind of see later what I do with those. Cleaning off my mat, and I'm going to start with these flowers. And I'm just kind of playing around with them a little bit to see how they might fit together, referring back to my card to see what colors I want to use on these. For the flowers in this set, you can assemble them however you want. The picture that comes with the die set kind of gives you an idea of what you can do with them, but it's not a rule. You don't have to follow it. And I'm not going to, because don't tell me what to do. So I will end up assembling these flowers a little differently than what you would see on the guide in the die set. So I am just using pink diamond here, and I'm focusing that color in the center of the flowers and then using a circular motion to move outward toward the petal tips. And I'll just keep going back over this until I'm happy with the look. And speaking of look, do we want to take bets on how long it's going to take me to notice that that hunter green ink pad is still open over there? Or maybe when I'm going to run my hand through it and then ruin my whole project? Let me know in the comments. As I said at the beginning of the video, I only ended up using 2 of the pinks that I originally picked out. For these small little flowers, I'm going to use the Rubellite ink and one of the really small detail blending brushes from Simon Says Stamp. And I'm just coming in from the outside of the flower and blending inward to leave the center of the flower a little lighter. Also, you may have noticed that the ink pad is closed now, the green one over to the side. And I did finally notice it, but it was only because I had to stop what I was doing and go outside to manage my children who were playing their favorite game called Let's All Go to the ER. So when I came back in, I noticed that. Now I'm going to clean off my mat and we're going to get into the blues that I chose. I'm going to use them on the flowers I have here. I'm just cleaning off my brush with some rubbing alcohol and a paper towel. A really good way to do that is to just take a paper towel roll, spritz it with some rubbing alcohol, and then run your brush over it until the ink is no longer coming off. as you rub it across the paper towel. For my ink blending here, I'm just doing the same thing I did with the first pink flowers and going from the outside in. I mean, this is just a really easy way to add some dimension to flower petals like this so they don't just look flat. If they're all one shade, one color, they end up just looking flat on your card. And sometimes that's the look you're going for, but I just wanted a little more variation on this one. For these little flowers, I'm just using the Azurite and I just went over the whole petal with that blue ink, made them very dark. And then for these last little sprigs, I wanted a lighter green color, so I used Eucalyptus over the whole die cut for those. Now it's time for the embossing folder. I grabbed that Blooming Doily Charm embossing folder and an A2 panel, which is 5.5 by 4.25, and I ran that through my die cutting machine using my embossing folder sandwich. And then now I'm just gonna come in and start dry fitting my design, which means I'm just gonna lay my pieces down on my card, figure out how I want it to look before I actually start gluing things down. I used the same zero waste die to cut from brushed gold cardstock from Altenew. I thought I was going to use some gold leaves in my design, but I ended up deciding against that once I put them in and thought, well, I don't like how that looks. So really, I'm just going to use the flower centers. I'm making those gold. And then for these pink flowers, I'm just combining two petals together to make a full flower. So I'm just going to go through and glue all of those. I'm going to get glue all over my desk, glue all over my fingers. It was a fun time. I don't know what was up with my fine tip glue bottle, but it woke up and chose violence. It was just like, hey, you know, it'd be fun if it looked like this was your first time gluing things ever in your life. So I'm just going to struggle through this. And I swear there was a struggle. I edited most of it out, but between that and my kids outside playing Ultimate Fighting Champion, I was about to throw in the towel. Does anyone else have boys and knows exactly what I'm talking about? And then I have a daughter who is the third child, and she has just grown up with these two, and I swear she's the strongest of all three. Like she is absolutely the alpha of this group. But man, these kids. I'm just going to keep gluing these little gold centers into the flowers, and you're going to see me get a little bit distracted here because I was like, oh, what if I just glue these little pink flowers onto this greenery stem? And then I was like, okay, I'm going to file that away for later. And then I just continue gluing. Does anyone else get distracted like that while you're in the middle of something and you have a thought and you have to act on that thought? Is that called something? I don't know, like ADD. As I got to the tiny blue flowers, I decided to glue two of those die cuts together to make a larger flower. And honestly, it was a little bit difficult. You'll see me using my tweezers and my picker tool here to put those together and maneuver them a bit. So if you have dexterity issues, I suggest just leaving the tiny flowers as they are. But I am going to actually glue them down to these little sprigs here that I inked up with my Eucalyptus ink earlier. So I'll just glue one to the end of each one of these. And then I'm going to take my small pink flowers and glue one of those to each one of these other green sprigs that I have here. You can always do this also once you have your arrangement on your card. You can just kind of place your flowers wherever as you see fit, but I just thought that these looked cute with the little pink flower on the end, so that's what I did. Now I'm just going to start trying to get an idea of how I want to arrange these on this embossed panel here. So I'm just going to kind of start laying my flowers down, putting my greenery in, and there was a lot of pausing and staring. Normally I like to do things in odd numbers, but for some reason on this card it just looked a little odd to me. So I just keep kind of moving things around, You see, I have a lot of those gold pieces to the side, and I thought that it would look good to insert some of those into my arrangement, but then I decided against it because it just looked a little out of place. So then I took some additional sprigs that I had from my original die cutting that were on white paper, and I grabbed my Sand Dunes Altenew Fresh Dye Ink and just inked over those pieces a little bit so that they had kind of a goldish tone to them, but they didn't have the shine of the gold foil. And I ended up liking that a lot better. So here I'm just going to incorporate those pieces into my arrangement. And I really like them because it breaks up the green from all the leaves. It's just a nice added little neutral element to the design. And then I'm going to snap a picture with my phone so that I remember what I did and then grab a sentiment to go on this. So here I have my Creative Labels stamp set. It's also an exclusive product from the Altenew Secret Garden 2025 retreat, so it is not available for purchase. And then I'm going to grab the die or struggle to grab the die as though I've never taken anything out of a package before. Goodness. So I'm going to make sure that it fits over this grateful stamp, and I'm going to take that one out. I'm going to grab my Misty stamping tool and a scrap sheet of white paper. I always keep my scrap paper in those envelopes and I'll list them down below. I just organize them by color family, and it's a really great way for me to be able to just grab a scrap piece when I need one. I decided to stamp my sentiment, or rather emboss my sentiment, with antique gold embossing ink from Altenew. So I'm just going to prep my piece of paper here with an anti-static powder tool. I'm going to put my stamp down on my paper, pick that up with my Misty Door, and then I'm just going to rub my fingers over it a couple times to get off any residual oils to make sure I get a nice stamped impression. And then I'm going to ink that up with my Versamark ink, press that down onto my paper. I'm going to use a tool to make sure I get a really good impression on that stamp. And then I'm going to do it a second time, just to be sure, because I have trust issues. So after I stamp that down a second time, I'm going to take that out of my Misty and then grab a scrap piece of paper. I learned this from Kathy Zilski to catch any embossing powder that comes off of my piece of paper here. So that looks great. And then I'm going to pour the rest back into my container. And then I'm going to grab my heat tool and melt this embossing powder. I always like to let my heat tool warm up for a bit before I actually take it to my paper. I just feel like the embossing powder melts a lot better that way. And you also don't want to keep heat on your paper for too long because you can actually burn it. Ask me how I know that. So I'm just going to keep applying the heat evenly over the front and back until all of my embossing powder is melted. And then I'm going to grab that die, place it over my sentiment, and then run that through my die cutting machine. Just to make sure I keep this die in place and it cuts nicely, I'm going to grab some of my best ever craft tape and just put a couple pieces down to hold that die in place so that it cuts my sentiment out correctly. Now that my sentiment's cut out, I'm going to grab my embossed panel and I want to trim that down because I want to mat it against a colored cardstock card base. So I'm just going to trim about 1/8 of an inch off of each side of my cardstock panel here. And you might be asking, why am I trimming it off each side? Well, I want my embossed pattern to still remain centered on my card. You can see that large floral image in the middle. I wanted that to stay directly in the center of my card. So then I grabbed a piece of Citronella cardstock from Altnew to use as my card base because I thought that it matched the sand dune goldish colored pieces of my floral arrangement and was neutral enough not to distract from the floral arrangement on my card. So I just folded that into a side folding A2 card panel, which measures 5.5 by 4.25, and I'm just making sure that that looks good, matted against the card base there, and then I'm going to glue that down. Now, I chose to put my glue on the flattest side of my embossed panel because I just thought that it would probably adhere a little bit better. Normally, I would have the flat side facing up on my card, but really it's just whatever your preference is. Now I'm just gluing some additional die cuts for my sentiment to the back of my embossed sentiment just to add some dimension as well as stability to this. Especially since my card panel is embossed, I just wanted to make sure that that sentiment was really sturdy. Just trying to get an idea for placement here based on where my floral arrangement's going to be. And then I realized, you know what? I want to do some splatter on this. So I'm going to grab my splatter box, which is really just an Altenew order shipment box with a paper towel on the bottom. And I'm grabbing my Distress Spritz here, which is in Fossilized Amber. It's a really pretty gold color. I use it a lot for gold splatter on my cards. And I'm just kind of flicking that in the top left corner and the bottom right corner to sort of create a diagonal onto my card. And it dries pretty quickly. So I was able to almost immediately start kind of placing my die cuts and my floral arrangement. Now I'm just going to speed this up and add some music while I put this together. Now I'm going to come in with my gold coin embellishment mix from Trinity Stamps. I have so many of these little embellishment mixes and I love them because they're flat. So when you go to mail your cards, your embellishments aren't sticking up off the card and inevitably end up getting damaged. So I use these all the time. I'm just using some liquid glue to adhere these down, and then the front of my card is done. For the inside panel, I'm just going to put that in my splatter box, splatter it with the same Distress Spritz in Fossilized Amber, just in that bottom right corner. Then I'm going to take that out, grab my Sentiment Strips 2 set from Altenew, and grab the sentiment that says, "For my fabulous friend." I love these sentiment strip sets. There are 3 of them, and a good variety in each set to cover lots of occasions. So these are great to have in your stash just to grab to pop a sentiment on the inside of a card or to add a sub-sentiment to the front. I'm stamping mine in VersaFine Onyx Black ink, and I know I've said this before, but this ink has some pigment properties to it, so it doesn't dry immediately like a dye ink would, so you want to make sure that dries completely before you start manipulating your card. Here I am just adding some of my leftover floral arrangement pieces to the inside of my card. I'm just going to pop those in the bottom right corner and then adhere those down with liquid glue. I'm not using any foam tape here because I don't want there to be too much dimension on the inside of my card. And I've found that even though I have a lot of die cuts here, it doesn't add enough dimension to really make it problematic to send my card in the mail. So I do this a lot to finish off the inside of my cards with my extra die cuts. And that completes my inside panel. And I'm just going to glue that into my card base. And my card is done. How cute is that? I really like this one. I love these colors. I encourage you to look around in your everyday life to find inspiration for your next card. Everything I used to make this card is going to be linked in the description box below, and you can find some more information over on my blog at hiddenrivercreative.com, or you can follow me on Instagram at hiddenrivercreative.
Hi, I'm Jen with Hidden River Creative, and today we're going to be making this card inspired by this card. Oh. Hi, I'm Jen with Hidden River Creative, and today we're going to be making this card inspired by this card. And I keep pointing to you, Jen. God.